breathing retraining is actually looking at how you breathe all the time, that 20,000 or so breaths a day. So whether you're a snorer at night who retrains their breathing in the day to help with the snoring, or whether you're somebody who is very quick to anxiety and panic attacks and hyperventilates often, and therefore needs to bring that back all the time, not just in the moment they realise they need it. So we're looking at addressing all the breathing habits overall, and using breath work where needed to hack it to benefit even more. So the reason I'm so passionate about the education in this way is because so many people just have no idea that how we breathe matters. So they might have heard of meditation, mindfulness, breath work, yoga, and all of these are incredibly valuable in the space. However, they're a small section and they're specific to a certain time frame. What I want to show people is that where our tongue position is matters. Whether we're using our nose rather than our mouth matters. How many muscles we're using and in what capacity for what we're doing matters. And it all boils down to how we feel overall, and not having to just use breath work to calm down, but actually just being calmer in general.
It's the last episode of the first season of Make Movement Matter. Has it really been 10 weeks already? Don't worry, I'm not going to be a one-hit wonder. I'm in this for the long run. Well, as long as you'll have me. I have thoroughly enjoyed chatting with some really inspiring and interesting guests, and the feedback has been great. Season 2 is already in the pipeline and will be with you in early May. For my first season finale, I'm so excited to be joined by a dear friend, mentor, and fellow small business owner. Businesses created from pivotal life experiences tend to be heart-led, as their aim is first and foremost to help others become aware of something that can help them live a better life. Jane Tarrant is incredibly passionate about her subject, and it shows. I never fail to be energised by her company, and I hope you will be too. There's been a lot of focus recently in the wellbeing industry on breathwork and educating us about how the way we breathe affects how we feel. This is undoubtedly true, but did you know that the way we breathe all day long, rather than just when we notice how we're breathing, can actually be linked to some difficult symptoms? It's often assumed that when people hear Jane offers breathing retraining, that means breath work. But I asked Jane to tell us the difference between them.
So whilst breath work is involved in breathing retraining, breathwork is more of a hack. So for example, you might have heard of something like Wim Hof, which is more of a hyperventilation breathing, or something like box breathing, which calms our breathing down, slows it down, and even has breath holds in it as well. And whether you're going in each direction, you're still hacking your breath in order to achieve a result in that moment, whether it be immediately or a few minutes. But breathing retraining is actually looking at how you breathe all the time, that 20,000 or so breaths a day. So whether you're a snorer at night who retrains their breathing in the day to help with the snoring, or whether you're somebody who is very quick to anxiety and panic attacks and hyperventilates often, and therefore needs to bring that back all the time, not just in the moment they realise they need it. So we're looking at addressing all the breathing habits overall, and using breath work where needed to hack it to benefit even more.
Right. So you do, in fact, offer breathwork strategies, but the mainstay of what you're looking at is how you breathe all day long. And obviously, this is something that people will probably, I know, we're friends, I know they say to you, well, I'm just doing that anyway, aren't I? Because I'm alive. And they don't tend to know that there is a better way to breathe.
Exactly. So the reason I'm so passionate about the education in this way is because so many people just have no idea that how we breathe matters. So they might have heard of meditation, mindfulness, breath work, yoga, and all of these are incredibly valuable in the space. I don't want to knock these because they are part of what I do in so many ways. However, they're a small section and they're specific to a certain time frame. What I want to show people is that where our tongue position is matters. Whether we're using our nose rather than our mouth matters. How many muscles we're using and in what capacity for what we're doing matters. And it all boils down to how we feel overall, and not having to just use breath work to calm down, but actually just being calmer in general, or something like how much oxygen we actually deliver to our cells and to our brain. So if you want to think clearly, perform well, recover well, we want maximum delivery of oxygen or optimal delivery of oxygen. And yet, if you are somebody who breathes not so well, you might be called an overbreather, somebody who breathes a little too much through the mouth, using the upper chest, shallow, fast, loud, etc., then we're stuck in a pattern where we're actually reducing the amount of oxygen we're delivering to ourselves, and therefore we're just not optimal all the time. We're living, we're functioning, we're just not functioning as well as we could be.
It actually, to make a parallel, you know a lot about the way I like to move, and full disclosure, we've done each other's courses. We really support each other in what we do because we see so much parallel between what we're doing. There's so much overlap, I should say. And when you were talking there, it made me think about breathwork almost being sort of doing a stretch to alleviate a symptom of tension in a muscle where it's over tight and it's uncomfortable, and you do a lovely stretch and that can really alleviate it, but temporarily. And stretching, a lot of people, it's a really, again, like you're saying, with it's a useful part of your repertoire, but it's unlikely that you are going to solve a condition with it. And you need to delve deeper, which is what you're saying, isn't it? You're saying that you can use breathwork strategies, but you need to look at the underlying issue, which is coming from potentially dysfunction in the way you breathe.
Exactly. And there can be multiple layers to this. So partly it could be that we are physically moving our body in not the best way. So for example, if you ask somebody to take a deep breath, many people will lift into the upper chest. So if they put their hand on their upper chest and took a deep breath, they would see their hand rise and almost lifting the shoulders, and often breathing out through the mouth as well. Because this is what we've often seen, whether it's in cartoons, films, from our friends telling us, even yoga teachers might mimic this action when telling you to take a deep breath in order to calm down. But actually, what we're not realizing, it's very much the same as me saying, take your hand, hold it out in front of you, and now put it on your chin. And yet I've put it on my cheek. So many people follow me in sessions. Yeah, I do it all the time in my masterclass.
Are you trying to put them off by actually putting it on your cheek?
Yeah, so it's the same as me saying, take a deep breath, but actually showing them a shallow. It's the same as me saying, put it on your chin, but me putting it on my cheek. So people follow my hand, not what I said. And it's the same. And when they go, oh, and you say some people overthinking and suddenly go, oh, and they're going between chin, cheek, and they're not quite sure what they should be doing. And it's really funny because I do it all the time. And they laugh and realize, oh, of course, yes. I always watch people showing me a deep breath, which is incorrectly shown. And therefore, when I'm breathing normally, I might actually breathe quite deep. But as soon as I consciously try and breathe, I often go the wrong way, which can be really hard for people.
And I certainly see that with clients because I will do the, as you've taught me and as I've been taught by others, about having the hand on the upper chest and then the hand lower down. And I'm sure you'll come on to speak to us about the different areas of breathing. And the difficulty they have of feeling the expansion in their lower hand moving out the way as they breathe in. And in fact, they say they're doing the opposite. And you've got a name for that, haven't you? That type of breathing. Is that reverse breathing?
The sort of backwards breathing, or sometimes I call it corset breathing, because it's almost like you've been strapped in at the waist by a corset. You've lifted up, your chest is lifted, and you're rising into a very shallow space in a way that is backwards to what we actually want. We want it to go deep into the bottom of the lungs. So almost like on my t-shirt, I have a picture of an upside down tree where the canopy is at the bottom. And you want to fill into those leaves because that's where all the action happens with the gases. But if you're using just the top part of your lung through this shallow breath, we're being very inefficient with most of the air going into the trunk and branches and only a few of the leaves that aren't in the main canopy.
And to clarify that, the leaves are the only things that actually take the oxygen into the blood, not the trunk.
Exactly. So the trunk and the branches is where it comes down through like pipes, almost like a garden hose, but it actually needs to get into the leaves, and each leaf is wrapped in capillaries. So our blood actually allows it to transfer through, almost like a bunch of grapes, and each grape is wrapped. So when we see it, we can understand that actually it needs to transfer through, but that's where it happens. So if you're being inefficient by using lots of energy, lots of muscle usage that aren't the muscles you should be using 20,000 times a day with even a little bit of inefficiency, you can imagine how it racks up. So you're more tired to get the oxygen in. But the worst part here is that quite often when we're just sitting down, we might be breathing out, let's say 80% of the oxygen we breathed in. So you've worked really hard to give most of it out anyway. But what you haven't done, if you're breathing inefficiently and over breathing, is you're not delivering it well to your cells. So the oxygen is in the blood, but it's not getting off the bus. And this is the bit that people are like, I never really thought about how we breathe out mattering. They only think about breathing in, but obviously the more you're breathing in, the more you're breathing out as well.
So tell us a bit more about that exact process then of getting. So I think most people would think about the oxygen getting to your cells. Bingo, we've done our job. What more do you need? So tell us a bit more about that.
Exactly. So I like to do it very visually. It helps people to understand, but also to teach others, even children. So if you imagine sort of 3 red London buses, for example, and they're driving round and they get round to your lungs and they collect the oxygen from the lungs, and they get on as buses. They're in the blood. Yeah. So it's so these are the hemoglobin technically in the blood, and they drive around, collect the oxygen into the buses, and then they drive around to either the brain or the muscles or wherever they need to get to, whichever cells need them. And when they get there, you want to have like a motorway, so 3 lanes wide with 3 buses wide, all arriving at a time with another load behind them. And when they're there, you want little porters to sort of open the doors like you had outside like a hotel. You want them to get out, and all the oxygen that's needed can get off because all the doors that are needed have been opened. Now, in this scenario, the carbon dioxide, which is our waste gas that has been made from the carbon from our food plus the oxygen from the air in our cells, when that's kept in our body just long enough to do its job by not over breathing too much, they are standing there as porters to open the doors. So the less there is because you've breathed out too hard, the less porters there are to open doors, but also it helps widen the road in the first place. So carbon dioxide or CO2 helps widen not only the airway in order to get a good airflow down, but also the blood vessels. So you want the extra carbon dioxide kept in just enough, not too much, but just enough to widen those roads and deliver optimally.
That's fascinating, isn't it? Because, as you said, everyone always thinks CO2, waste gas, it's doing me no good. Got to get rid of it, got to expel it. But there's probably very little understanding about its importance in the role to then make you breathe more efficiently because you've got more capacity.
Exactly. And there's a double layer to this. So the simplified version is carbon dioxide, but you also have the added benefit of when you nose breathe, you're making nitric oxide. So that's nitrogen oxygen. And when we make nitric oxide, this also helps dilate your airways and your blood vessels. So it's a double whammy, but it's also what's used to sort of deactivate or kill viruses. So when we're trying to fight against colds and stuff coming in, we want to using our nose, which is a filter for viruses, bacteria, particles, and allergens, but it also warms and moistens the air and pressurizes it to get deep into the lungs. So the nose is vital, and yet we often just bypass it because, why not? No one's ever told us not to. Or it feels a little bit small for the scenario, potentially because our tongue is in the wrong position, or because our face has developed a little narrower, which is actually impacted by how we breathe as well as a child. So there's so many layers to this, but having that benefit of not only nose breathing, but reduced breathing, of which obviously the nostrils being a smaller hole helps you to do, versus mouth breathing, which is a much larger hole to dump through. So just these subtle tweaks can make all the difference, and then we can start improving our performance and our recovery and just how we're feeling and many other areas.
And when you talk about nose breathing, you're talking about breathing in and out, both through the nostrils without the use of the mouth.
Exactly. So in the industry, you'll get taught multiple different things for different reasons. So some people...
yogic breathing particularly, I think a lot of people in the movement space know about a yoga breath where it's in through the nose and out, and a longer, for calming purposes, out through the breath. It calms the nervous system nicely and so on, which I now don't do because of you.
And the reality is that for a short period of time, and for using it for a hack reason, there's no right or wrong if you're using it to get a result. But in the long term, if you are sitting down here and you obviously might have dust around you, there might be microplastics, there might be viruses, whatever, you want to be getting the best chance that you're filtering well. But equally, if you think about a cold day, and this might seem a bit more relevant because it's more extreme, you're going out on a cold day, breathing in through your nose starts to feel cold, and then you might be breathing out through your mouth, maybe if you're jogging or you're just used to doing that. But as you breathe out through your mouth, you're not re-moistening and re-warming the nose so that the next breath coming in through the nose can be re-warmed or re-moistened, which is what prepares it for the lungs and helps the lungs to be less irritated by the cold, dry air. So many people are used to cyclical breathing. They're sort of in through the nose, out through the mouth, either for calming or for the fact that they're trying to create a rhythm whilst running. But effectively what they're doing is creating a fake nostril in the front of their mouth. In and out.
That's a vision.
It feels really strange. Now, where it becomes more extreme is when somebody cannot breathe out through their nose because they get this sort of, I can't possibly, I'm getting this gasping for air sort of feeling. And this...
Which, when your heart is raised, particularly runners, joggers, runners, presumably, if we went and looked at the London Marathon, how many people would have their mouths open?
Many, many, many people. And that's partly for a couple of reasons. So the main reason that we find that is that we're not used to the buildup of carbon dioxide in our body, because the more we're using our muscles, the more we're generating. And if we're going through nostrils, it can feel a little small, especially if we have become mouth breathers or over breathers all the time, and therefore sort of degraded our warning signal to this sort of reduced space. So as soon as we then stretch it using extra CO2, we kind of go very quickly. And you might recognize that in something like yoga, where everybody else is still on the first slow breath that's being guided by the teacher, and you're there in your second or third breath thinking, how are they breathing so slowly? And this is often the one where we go, that's me. This is a reduced tolerance to carbon dioxide in a space that you should be able to comfortably do slow breathing or some running without having to switch. Now, if I try and run, which I'm not a big runner, but if I try and run, I will use my nose only until my CO2 builds up far too far. And then I will dump through my mouth for a couple of breaths, and then I will revert to my nose to keep it as optimal as possible. And I want that buildup of carbon dioxide, but I also want to push my tolerance and not just sort of give up and let it degrade. So this is an area a lot of people don't think about. Now, the other side is that, and this is a sort of, it starts back in childhood, is how we breathe as a child can impact our facial development. So if we breathe through our mouth, maybe there's been cats in our room and we might be a little bit allergic, or mold in the house, or maybe we've got a dairy allergy or something like this that's created congestion, something that's stopped us breathing through our nose as much, or coughs and colds and things, and no one ever told us to try and revert. We can drop our tongue and become a mouth breather. And when we do that, the tongue isn't in the roof of the mouth to help kind of form the face forward and sideways, creating gaps between the baby teeth more so, and giving you sort of a strong facial structure. Instead, what happens is your cheeks can sink in because there's nothing to hold the teeth out. The teeth can start to angle inwards, become very narrow, triangular in the roof of the mouth, and crooked. And then maybe when you're 12, you might have teeth taken out or something to create space. Now, this can be partially down to your genetics in terms of how wide your face might start as. But we've also got things like breastfeeding and chewing, which It doesn't always happen, and we can't always breastfeed, for example, but it is good for strengthening the face if possible, in the same way that we're on an ultra processed food diet mostly now. So chewing is actually quite hard to do unless you really make an effort to. So we're not often doing all the things that help us to improve our breathing, improve our facial development, including the breathing. And that's why we should get onto this quite young, before we get to the age of 12. So sort of age 6 to 12 is quite a crucial time, because it can really make a difference to how your face forms. Now, if your face does form narrow, the roof of your mouth goes up into your nasal cavity. Your whole nose structure can be impacted, and therefore your airway is then also smaller. And that's what happened to me.
I was about to say, are we talking about anyone in particular here, Jane?
Yeah, I mean, this is my personal story. When I was age 7, my nose felt too small, and I just went, well, I can breathe through it, but my mouth feels easier, so I'll just do that.
So when you say your nose felt too small, you mean that you felt forced to use your mouth to breathe. You felt like you had no other option.
I felt like I can use it, but I don't feel like I'm getting enough air, which is the term most people understand of what they feel. And it's not that I'm not getting enough air, it's just that I'm not used to this increased amount of carbon dioxide because of how much I'm reducing the airflow. But on the flip side, if I'm running, I might actually not be getting enough air because my nose is smaller. So I actually tape mine up, lift it away.
I've seen it. It's beautiful.
Yeah, it's some sexy stuff. I tape my mouth up so you can't breathe through that, and I lift my nose up with tape so I can actually hold the nose open, because if you sniff very hard, you can crush the sides because the air flows so fast, and therefore you want to be able to optimize. So I kind of have a bit of a hack around that, but I wish I'd had the facial structure in the first place.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's so fascinating. And I think for parents or grandparents who have never thought about how the development of a child's mouth could affect their breathing for their entire lives, and have the opportunity to do that, then it's well worth sort of finding a dentist, orthodontist who is knowledgeable in these areas, understands how that can affect their life, and get them checked, I suppose, which I know you've had done recently with your own daughter.
Yeah, exactly. And what's worrying in this space is that there aren't actually that many providers that can do anything about it or will do anything about it. So I actually took my daughter down to Dr. Stefan Decker at the orthodontic specialist in Amersham, which is just northwest of London. And he is more advanced, shall we say, than a lot of people in this country. And he's actually teaching other orthodontists about early preventative orthodontics for children. And they actually use things like clear aligners. So people might have heard of Invisalign, but that kind of concept for young children to help create space as they're growing, so their tongue can actually go into the roof of their mouth at where it should be, to help that nasal breathing, but also to develop, and to also make sure they're not going to have so much crowding and teeth taken out and their face getting smaller. But in order to intervene, there needs to be some sort of, mouth breathing, sleep apnea, snoring, some sort of thing where functionally there is obviously a problem.
You notice there's a problem. Exactly.
But he does free assessments as well. So if people are listening, check him out.
If you're in the area, go
and get a free assessment, because why not? If you've got a child who's 6, 7, 8, 9, get on it before the NHS will just sort of do their best with what they know and will do.
With what happens. Exactly. Which is, unfortunately, all they can afford to do in many cases.
Exactly.
So tell me then, fast forward to adults, what are the main sort of symptoms, particularly the sort of unexpected symptoms that people either come to you with once they find out that breathing affects that, or that you are educating people about to say, actually, have you thought about the way you breathe because of these symptoms?
Yeah. So there are some people who just go, I don't breathe well. There's something, and they know they don't breathe well because they've been told by an orthodontist or a chiropractor or somebody who's obviously picked up on the fact, but they don't necessarily know how to educate them to change it. So there's a few people like that, but most people will find it because they have breathlessness, either it's on stairs or in general. It might be more of a panic breathlessness, like maybe in the evening as they're going to bed and, the stress of the day is hitting them, or it might be during sport and they're like, but I never used to be and I'm really fit, so why am I breathless?
Okay.
And they can't explain why it's happening, and they may be getting checks with their doctors or whatever, but they're still not getting answers because nothing's really wrong. And so this is an area that I deal with because it's the missing piece. In the NHS in the UK, we don't actually educate so much on this. The people who are in the NHS who actually work on similar stuff to me, they're also trained as maybe respiratory physios, and they learn outside of the NHS to bring it in. So it's not really well known. But otherwise, people might come because they are experiencing panic attacks, and they don't realize that how they're breathing all day is edging them closer and closer and closer, so that when they get a slight anxiety trigger, they're already like slamming into that wall really fast rather than having warning signs. And if you think about when you're slightly anxious, you feel a bit of a upper chest lift, this sort of tightness. But if you breathe there all the time, because that's your norm, you're never going to get that early cue, that sort of warning signal that you can actually go, I'm going to step in here and claim it back. Instead, you just sort of go a half an hour longer and suddenly you're at
your baseline.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So we can actually, by doing breathing retraining, as well as using breath work, we can bring you well away and then give you a tool that you can use should you need it, whether it's become an emergency or preventative tool. And then other times it's someone who, for example, like snores or mouth breathes, and they might notice they're waking in the night for a wee or to drink water.
The question with the snoring, though, I discussing this with other people as well, and in my own household, do you struggle with the fact that it's not the snorer who struggles because it's the partner of the snorer, and the partner may have nothing wrong that needs to come to you, but the snorer really does? I mean, I think I know the answer to that, and I want to refer people. I came to your TEDx talk in Newcastle, which was in November last year.
Yeah,
is that right? And to support you, and you, I'm going to link it in the show notes because you told a very impactful story about snoring right at the beginning that was quite shocking, really, as to the disastrous effect it had had on someone's life. So I'm going to get people to go and watch that. But do you find that people are willingly coming to you and saying, my snoring's a problem, can you help me? Because my wife or my partner is going to kill me?
So it really depends. And it depends on the severity of the snoring. It depends on whether it's just a recent thing or maybe they got a recent relationship, but it's become a problem more critically now. I think people don't look for help unless their pain point is critical enough, is the truth of it. They could learn that snoring isn't maybe an unhealthy breathing habit that's not doing them any favors and it's going to make them more tired or whatever, but that may be not enough for them to actually go out of their way to find out more or to get help. However, somebody who is sleeping on the couch and wants to get back in the bed with their partner, that's quite a motivation. Or someone who's being elbowed every night, or, a bit of passive aggressive, chat the next morning, there can be a bit more. And, I recently had somebody who was recommended to me by their partner who was bothered by it, but actually they actually felt embarrassed by it. They didn't want to snore. But they were like, but I don't know what to do about it. I've bought this device that didn't work. I bought this thing for my mouth, which also can screw up teeth, or, I bought this thing for my nose or whatever it is, chin strap. They might have tried all sorts of things. And they're just like, I've tried everything I can find on the internet. And the doctor just says, well, I can send you for a sleep study, but, whatever. And they're kind of left. And this is quite a serious issue. So when you've got somebody who has enough of a reason because they actually care, whether it's just for their partner or it's also for their own health, then they will come and ask. But it's got to feel like enough of an issue, which it is for many people. But the second point is most people don't even know. The amount of partners that come up to me, they go, I had no idea you could actually help with snoring, please. But it's life-changing, and it can completely change your energy levels. It changes your relationship. It changes how you're performing at work, how you're performing in sport, how you're recovering, how ill you get. If you've got a cough or a cold and then you're going through the mouth, and you're sort of drawing all this sort of irritating dry air in, that's only going to feel worse. So it's trying to adapt when we get the chance to. But the reality is that unless it's bad enough, people don't do the work, just like in where your thing is. If people can get on off the floor easily and they haven't really thought about it, they might not even consider working with you.
And that was absolutely, totally and utterly me, because I wasn't doing the work for most of my day. So this is the similarities between us is it's the way you do things all day long is important. And if you disregard that, don't realize it's important, then you obviously get to the point where something bad can happen. And for me, it was really bad, and it was long term, and a lot of pain, and really pushed me to a limit. But I think both of our shared mission is that we avoid people having to get to that limit through education and awareness of what they can do all day long, what their baseline can be, to make sure that they move or breathe optimally, which is, so it's kind of our shared joint mission on different levels. But you can't, if you don't breathe, you can't move. It's you need both. That's what we do as humans, as animals. We have to breathe to live, and we are moving species. And that's why when you breathe well and move well, you feel better. It's the best way. Obviously getting the oxygen in, and getting it in the right way by breathing well is utterly important. But also then using that by moving, getting things moving, using your muscles, everything is going to be better. It's going to get it to, you're going to think better, because, you're getting that oxygen to the brain, which is key. So we can be more optimal in our work. But then also we're using our body. So as you're saying, we can continue to do things that we want to do, getting up and down off the ground, being the most basic one that we forget to do, and so on. But so moving on to movement a little bit, we're going to come back to some practical little tests later, a little bit later. But first of all, let's talk about posture, because we both talk about posture. That's one bit where we are literally overlapping and in perfect harmony. So how can posture affect the way that you breathe?
That's a very good question. And it comes up a lot, actually, because most people don't really think about their posture. And if you were to try and adjust your posture and try and train it just for posture's reason, you probably wouldn't do it. But when you actually have a reason or a way in which to assess it, it starts to change. So one of the things that I teach is something called the D spot. So there was already something called the N spot in myofunctional therapy and tongue training. And I thought, I like this. This is easy. It reminds me a bit of the G spot, something a bit fun, and also, something to aim for in the body. And so I thought, I'll run with this. And I love the D spot concept. So that means your diaphragm. And if you, for example, take your fingers onto the front of your chest, find the bottom of your sternum. So on women, it might be around the bra strap area. And where it's quite tight there, take a couple of fingers down into the bouncy bit just below. So it's on the upper end, far up from your belly button, just below the split of the ribs. And this is what I call the D spot. So the diaphragm is an umbrella-shaped muscle underneath and wrapped all the way around the body. So, or not wrapped around the body, but it spans the whole body with sort of tubes going through. And that plunges down in order to allow us to breathe in, and then goes up to allow it to come out.
I've always liked the bellows analogy.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I can see bellows. Maybe that's me showing age. I didn't have bellows in a fire. I wasn't, I'm not that old. But it does, if you remember what bellows are like, it does really help with seeing the diaphragm, I think.
I have bellows, and I'm relatively young.
For some, maybe. You're a lot younger than me.
So we have the diaphragm there. Now, if you are upper chest breathing, or what I call as belly breathing but too low, because when we hear belly breathing, we're being taught this in order to simplify what diaphragmatic breathing means, because most people can't sort of feel the diaphragm. They might not understand quite how it should look or feel. So people came up with a way to sort of teach breathing, which was belly breathing. But my problem with that is that in the wrong posture, you can still belly breathe, i.e., bloat at the bottom of your belly, from your belly button and below. But in the correct posture, you can do it, but you can now do from the correct area, which is your D spot. So if you were to slouch down in your chair, a bit like a teenager, sort of shuffle your bum to the front.
I know that position well at the moment.
With your 3 teenagers, yes. So curling your back into the sort of C shape, kind of imagine slumped at a laptop or playing a computer game or whatever it is, or just on a sofa watching TV. And now you put your fingers on your D spot. When you breathe in, it's very difficult to feel your fingers moving away. It sort of feels like it's going to go down into your lower belly or it's going to go up into your upper chest. But when you sit upright, almost like tall, like a ballerina, and you sort of elongate yourself, so you're not sort of slouching or hanging your belly out, but instead you're tall but not tense, then you can feel that as you breathe in, your fingers on your D spot can move away.
And can I just add to that? So often when people think of lifting up and tall through their spine, they will then extend through the spine. And that's just as bad. Because arching your back effectively, and that extension through the upper spine is then also putting tension on. So when you're talking about being relaxed there, that's also making sure that there's still a natural connection between your ribs. So when you thrust the ribs up too much, that's also going to be restrictive. So making sure, which can be an issue often with people, I digress, but with people who have issues with arm extension, because they will do that through lifting and lowering the chest. And that's obviously going to affect breathing as well, if they're permanently a bit lifted in order to get the range in their arms through their shoulders. So it can be difficult both ways.
Exactly. In fact, just as sort of an example of where this might show up, I had a friend earlier in the week tell me how they were trying to improve their shoulder strength by hanging in the park. And as they were hanging, they could breathe in fine. But then as they tried to breathe out, they had to sort of almost lift themselves a little in order to breathe out. And I think that it was down to posture and tightness. But what do you think in terms of something like that, where people go, oh, I'd never noticed it until I'm trying to move, and then I'm realizing this restriction in breathing?
That to me would sound all about issues around, which I'm sure you'll go on to talk about their rib cage, their ability to expand, but also just how they're using their diaphragm normally. Yeah, I would say
it's quite an interesting one. So when we look at the diaphragm movement, we want to be keeping just the diaphragm, not bloating the whole belly, bloating the guts out, putting pressure on the pelvic floor, because the diaphragm and pelvic floor work together as sort of in the same directions. And so if you put too much pressure on, that's not ideal for your pelvic floor for various reasons. But if you are actually sitting up or standing up tall, and I mean tall, a little bit like you're being pulled from a strand of hair to the ceiling, not I'm putting my chest out, then you're able to feel really comfortable in that D spot. Now, where we have an issue is somebody might listen to this or watch it and try it, and they might be like, okay, breathe in, and the only thing that should move, not the upper chest, not the belly, the only thing that should move is your D spot going outwards on the in-breath.
And so in a way, having your fingers on your D spot, your yellow spot on your t-shirt, if you're watching on the video, which is at that bra strap, that softer point that you described,
just below,
but also for comparison purposes, having a hand on the upper chest to see, when I'm doing this, is that hand lifting and lowering? And also visually looking in the mirror, do the shoulders move up and down? All of that, getting all that feedback, as well as having the hand there, is key.
Exactly. And what people might realize is, actually, I can't do that. That feels strange. Or, well, I'm going in and up.
I don't understand. Yes.
Or I don't really know how to even access this mentally. So, and I actually cover this as part of my free masterclass that I do every month. So it's called How to Recognize Your Current Breathing Habits. And it's on my Link Breathing website. But this allows people to come along, put their hands on in specific positions, getting their thumb on where it should be, and actually understanding, like, as you're breathing in different scenarios with different sort of instructions, when you're just normal breathing, or whether I'm saying, take a deep breath, do something, do whatever else I'm asking you to do, you start to notice, well, what's the association issue? I.e., a deep breath suddenly becomes this when it's not meant to be, straight up into the upper chest. This is not what we want. But even for somebody who knows that, they still do it. So it's recognizing, well, what is just naturally happening and what am I accidentally doing without realizing? And once we know that, then we can start to work on it. Then we can start to improve it. But until we have that understanding of what's going on, which is very hard to do alone without actually being guided through, we don't really know the subtleties of what to change, because they're only tweaks. It's just small tweaks. And then I sort of use sort of wasted time in the day to sort of train this, not sort of sitting down for 10 minutes doing breath work. It's not my style. How can we just gradually train this so it's a way of life? So every time you walk your dog or go up the stairs or go to make tea, you just are breathing better all the time. And it feeds into the rest of the time, day and night.
Helped in my case by having post-it notes all around the house.
Yes, exactly.
Which were great for me. And actually one of them, I mean, that was a very long time ago. One of them still is on my mirror, my bedroom mirror. And I still notice it and it still helps. It's interesting, isn't it? Even when you get used to something, it can still be beneficial to have those reminders, which is why, coaches need coaches. We all need to be checked in and we can fall into worse patterns again. I talk to you regularly, as I said earlier, colds in the house, been a bit of snoring going on and so on. And you're very willing to say, when do your mouth breathing? To pull me out of it, which is great. We need that. We need to have the accountability. And one thing I actually was thinking about as well, about posture, is also forward head position, because that's very common in what I do. I see that a lot. Obviously, people come with neck and head tension, pain, but clearly that's going to affect your breathing as well, I presume. Not only is it more likely to make you curve through the spine, as we were just talking about, because the head is very heavy and it's already forward, and therefore you're more likely to be collapsing down and not allowing that diaphragm to expand optimally. But I presume it's also affecting the windpipe and literally the space you have to breathe through.
So there's a couple of things here. So first of all, in terms of the accountability and reminding, like that's why your Instagram account is so good. Just every time I see that or I see your name, I'm like, have you moved? If you haven't moved, get up and move now. Like, so it just associations can be really helpful. And the more we have those positively, the better.
Thank you.
But, there we go. But when it comes to forward head posture, obviously there can be different reasons why that can happen. And part of it can be if you are a mouth breathing child, for example, you might be developing a forward head posture because of that. And then I had forward head posture very much more than I do now, but I still have an element of it just because of how I developed. But I would run and I got called an ostrich if I sort of swung my neck from side to side with my head forward, gasping for air in this small air pipe, and with my tongue down. And yet, now that my tongue can be in the correct position and I can use my nose and I sort of obviously take my nose, I don't feel the need to have quite the same sort of gasp for air sort of head posture. But in the same way, often one of the common reasons people sort of or not the reasons they come to me, but one of the sort of, oh, that just happened and that's amazing, is that they have upper chest and upper shoulder and neck tension. And this can be just from how you breathe. So although, yes, we think, oh, it's because I drive or because I work at a laptop, actually, so many people that are upper chest breathing, partly because of poor posture, and partly because of anxiety and stress and things, they are upper chest breathing using these backup muscles, these accessory muscles in the upper chest rather than the diaphragm. And so they're overworking and tiring and really getting this real tension in a way they shouldn't be. But as soon as someone retrains their breathing, they suddenly notice this sort of melting away. And it's such a lovely thing. And some people have said to me, I no longer need to go to my chiropractor every 3 months because I just sit properly at the laptop. I notice my posture because I'm aware of how I should breathe. And because I'm focusing on that, it's not a, you didn't do your posture properly, nor to you. It's more like you're aiming for a positive thing.
And I think that's very true. I think when your body finds something that makes it move or exist more optimally, the body wants to exist optimally. It wants to be efficient. It wants to be well, thank goodness. And therefore, you're more likely to feel better in that position. I'm often amazed by how much my body tells me it needs movement. And that sounds a bit woo-woo. There's no little person screaming at me. But I can now sense into my body when I'm not quite right and I need a bit of movement or I need relaxation, so I can tune into myself better to know what I need so that I am becoming more optimal. And for example, being at a laptop and I've spent too long writing something and my brain starts to be fuzzier, I feel a little bit frustrated, whatever. I know that if I simply get up and move around for a couple of minutes, really doesn't matter how, there's certain ways clearly I like to do, but when I do, things feel better in my body and I can get back to it and feel refreshed. I can be more efficient in what I'm doing. And that's what it's all about, isn't it? It's being able to allow your body to find that optimal. Because in a way, I think with the onion skin layers of life, we get to all these experiences that happen to us. We get to a point where our bodies become a bit confused. Our alignment is off, or we have an accident and something throws us out, or some situation with breathing. You've talked before about, people having injuries, and there's an awful lot of things that can happen to us that then take us offline, and the body sort of slightly forgets how to be optimal. So retraining in both our capacities helps the body to remember how to feel good.
Absolutely. And if you're not moving, your diaphragm is going to be compromised by that. Even sitting in the correct position for a really long time is not ideal. But in the same way, what my greatest challenge is the forward head posture. Because if I'm, for example, I'm wearing heavy headphones right now, they're not that heavy, but, there's an extra weight on my head. And if, for example, I'm really interested in what someone's saying, I might be like leaning towards them on the screen. And I find that if I'm at my laptop for a long period of time on multiple calls and I don't get the chance to move, I feel awful at the end of the day. I get really sort of tension, headache sort of feeling. And yet if I have a day where I'm able to move and walk around and get a break, and sometimes I'll sort of go, right, I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable. I get up and I remember one of your videos that I learned from, and I'm sort of flapping my arms almost like wings, not quite, but you know the one I mean. And I just feel better for moving, even if it just takes a minute or two. And even sometimes if I co-work with a friend or something, I'm like, right, let's go and get moving, and we go out to the garden or to the kitchen, and I lead them through a bit of fun. We just have some fun.
Yes, absolutely. It's so important. And obviously, if you're not breathing optimally, then that can affect the way you then move. So that can create a restriction. We were talking before about the ribs, and I will often see that people's ribs, the intercostal muscles between the ribs, can become very tight and jammed. And when we then want to twist through the body, there's a real limitation there. And in fact, we're sort of moving as one whole block rather than having that lovely, important twist. And therefore, if those ribs, which are sort of protecting the diaphragm to an extent, just above, but if they are not moving, then that's going to limit your ability to use the diaphragm, isn't it? So everything kind of works together.
Exactly. And so I worked with a couple of clients. So one was a male who was in his 50s. He walked for his job, and he had asthma. And that's one of the reasons why he initially came to me.
Is that postman?
Postman, yeah. And so he was after working part way through what we were doing, where he learnt to actually get his diaphragm moving and opening his ribs in a way he was like, oh my God, I just didn't even know that was possible. The feeling he felt was incredible. And yet after a couple of weeks where he was walking around, he had somebody on his round actually comment on how much better he was standing and walking, how his posture had changed so much in literally a matter of a couple of weeks. And then somebody else who, she was in her 70s, I believe, and she was asthmatic with anxiety. And she went to her Pilates teacher, who she went to all the time. And just literally about 3-4 weeks into changing it, she was being told how much better her movement was, how she was able to twist better and get a greater sort of flare on the side of her ribs. So these small things we don't think about, they really impact just day-to-day activities, whether it's your job or sport or something that you like to do.
But then even the ramifications are beyond that in much more basic terms. If you can't twist properly, then you have the issue that if something is fixed, we always think about what's happening above and below it, because that's why we have all the lovely parts that allow movement. But when one is rigid and sticky, it affects the movement of those above, because they've got to act in place of that part that's sticky. So often when we have knee, we look at hip and ankle. How are they doing? We have to check everything. And it's the same, obviously, with our middle. And then if you are restricted both in your breathing and your ability to twist, then you're much more limited in many things that you can do. I mean, I'm thinking even of the whole reverse parking with the neck. If you don't have the movement through your neck, and often with forward head positioning, we can't get the range of movement in our neck because it's designed to be stacked nicely through our neck spine. And when it's forward, there isn't as much range. So there's so many different sort of ripple effects that happen when even one small thing is off. Those are great examples. And I think everyone can really imagine people around them in those situations where they probably hadn't even thought that how they breathe could actually help someone in that position. And obviously there's with the symptoms that you talked about, there's probably someone in everyone's life who's going to hear this and think, I wonder if they've thought of that. And so I urge them to go and see to first of all watch your TED Talk to really understand a few basics. We talked about the tongue position with the end spot. We've talked about the diaphragm. Do you want to talk just a little bit about your other spot, your R spot that you like to talk about? Because that really is related to what we've just been talking about.
Absolutely. So there's a couple of things I'd love to cover. So one is the R spots, and the other is actually to do with perimenopause and menopause, which I think might be quite relevant for your audience. But when we have on the side of our ribs here, so either side of the D spot on the side of the ribs, if we imagine sort of breathing for running, for example, not that we maybe all run, but if we imagine some form of exacerbated breathing, we don't want to be sort of lifting into the upper chest with these sort of staying static or even going to go slightly in. We want to be thinking about how can we expand. And as we breathe in, it should be quite a wide expansion to get to a full sport breath. So all of that is breath, and then out. And I've gone out the equivalent of maybe half a finger to a finger's length sideways, which is quite a substantial movement. But for some people, they try and there's absolutely nothing, or there's maybe a centimetre, but they just can't get the movement. So let's
just describe that really clearly for people. So taking your hands, thumbs to the back of the body, rest of the fingers
depending
to the front.
On your wrist. Yeah, depending on your wrists and how easy it is for you to get your hands onto the side. But you could put your hands downward, or your thumbs in front with fingers behind, or you can twist it thumbs behind, fingers in front. But rather than being on your waist, you're on your ribs. So all little finger at the bottom of the bottom rib.
Right.
And as you breathe in, you are pushing out sideways, but you're also moving slightly forward and back in the ribs. It's sort of expanding all around. But the main thing you'll see in a mirror or on a screen is the sideways expansion. Right. But many people, they might be incapable of moving this because it's so tight. They actually need to start to work it to get it going, of which is what I sort of teach on my course, for example. Or they consciously don't know how to actually think of breath that way, or they don't know how to access the muscles with their brain. And so that's kind of how we find different ways to teach. It's not so much about physio, because I'm not a physio. It's about how can I access a muscle or a movement that I've never even thought about being related to this situation. And once we can crack that, which can be done alone or with the help of somebody around you, you can feel like, oh my God. And some people kind of say, I can't believe I've just taken my first deep breath since COVID, or I don't even know that oh my God, I found my diaphragm. These feelings of excitement that people can feel when they finally know what it feels like, because they just didn't remember from a child. They don't remember what it used to be like.
Yeah. And to take in that breath, feel the ramifications through their entire body must feel absolutely amazing.
Yeah.
And certainly working with you, I had to work with increasing that. And I could feel the difference by minimal training. It's not training where it's sets and reps at the gym type of feeling. It's just checking in and occasionally having a go at a few different things on a regular basis. Both of we need consistency with these things in life to be able to make progress. We can't sort of dip our toe in once a week and hope for these things to change. But as you say, when you're committed, you are committed, and you want that change. So you try and you prioritize it, and then you get the results. And it's quite amazing that the feeling, the change that you can make, and therefore how that makes you feel. It's really brilliant.
Exactly. And if you think about the restriction that people might be feeling, and this is where this comes quite across well into...
I've just realised I've still got my hands on and I'm still expanding where I'm enjoying this. I can take the arms off now.
I love it. So when you think about, if you're not in that area, which is expansive and enabling you to breathe for maybe 6 to 8 seconds at a maximum, maybe 4 to 6 at a minimum, that's compared to maybe upper chest, which is maybe 3 seconds until you're maxed out.
Wow.
Or your belly, which is 3 seconds till you're maxed out. And you can't go any further. And so that restriction is really apparent to those who kind of go, I just feel short of breath or tight or unable to get a proper breath. This is the feeling that people mention. But what I'm most concerned about at the moment as well is that's not being covered is many people are now aware of, the symptoms we're getting with perimenopause and menopause. And, we might be aware of hot flushes or brain fog, poor sleep, but there's also this breathlessness element and this increased anxiety. Now, when our estrogen is dropping, it is impacting our breathing and heart rate in the same way that when you're premenstrual, you actually have an increase in heart rate and breathing rate as well. So it can be just enough to make you that bit more anxious, a bit more challenged. And I use a lot more breath work and conscious check-ins when I'm premenstrual than when I'm not. But when it comes to when you're perimenopause or menopause and you're feeling these issues, what I'm concerned about is that we're just sort of going, oh, well, people get breathless. We don't really know why. It's just sort of part of menopause, isn't it? And lots of articles online don't really tell you why it might be happening other than this estrogen shift. But I'm like, there might be an estrogen shift that is impacting this, yes. But if you are already degraded to a point where this is going to tip you over the edge, obviously you're going to get that final thing in the same way that if we haven't moved well or breathed well for quite a long time, no one notices it while they're in their 20s, and then maybe their 30s, they get a little cronky. In their 40s, we feel a little bit more old and they realize they can't quite put their shoes on without sort of breathing through their mouth in an exacerbated way or whatever it is. But by the time they're at their 50s, they're struggling to get on and off the floor or do anything else they enjoy.
Or balancing to be able to do it, yes.
Exactly. So in the same way, when it comes to perimenopause and menopause, you're at that point where you've got enough generation or enough decades to get to the point where if you weren't breathing well and you were stuck and restrictive, then obviously you're going to feel substantially more issues when you have a slight tweak than if you breathed really well. In the same way that premenstrually, we get substantially more anxiety if you don't actually control it. So what I'd say here is, I'm not saying this is a fix-all for that situation. What I'm saying is, if you haven't actually looked at addressing your breathing habits and you are getting this increased brain fog, this feeling of feeling extra tired, or the fact that you're feeling breathless especially, I would be saying, you should definitely be looking at, are you actually breathing well in general? Because if you can bring it back a little bit, even just improve it slightly, this is well worth looking at.
And in a way that kind of is even broader than people who are in a certain stage of life. It's almost expands out to anyone who perhaps hasn't got severe symptoms, but actually isn't quite sure how they should, don't really like that word, but how they could breathe that would be more beneficial for them. And particularly as they age, whether that the way they have been breathing has actually degraded. So in a sense, you need to offer something which is just a how to check in to see how you're doing. Do these 4 or 5 tests to help the person check. And I know that on your monthly masterclass, you have few enough people that you are interacting with them, aren't you? You are actually talking through them and helping them, and they're able to ask you questions. And I think that's really, really key, because often we will listen to a podcast, get lots of inspiration and think, I really want to know this, or check myself, but I can't apply it to me.
Yeah.
And I think that's always the hardest bit, because you're fired up and excited and think this could be so good for me or my partner or whoever. But I don't know, but how, and even sometimes I will read books and I'll think, but what, how does that affect me in my life? So yeah, I would suggest go along to a masterclass, that's for sure. That would absolutely be the best thing, because, you know, why not check? I'm always amazed that we don't go to a doctor once a year for a full check-in. And in the UK, sadly, with the NHS, you do in America because you're paying insurance. But in the UK, we don't. And we get to a certain age where we suddenly think, oh, I think I should be checking something here, because I'm giving my car an MOT and servicing it regularly, just to keep it optimal, not to slightly make it better because it's not doing so well, but just to make sure it's at its optimal level so we don't crash. And yet we don't do the same with our body. We don't do the same with our breathing. We often won't with our nutrition, all these things where if we don't honor this amazing vehicle that we have that's taking us through life and really treat it with respect and really look after it, then we're going to run into problems. So sorry, that's a bit of a blah on about look after yourself.
But you've got a point there that we should be sort of doing this check-in, but equally on the flip side, you've got to recognize that what, for example, you and I do is not covered by a doctor. So if you go to a doctor for anxiety and panic attacks, you're much more likely to walk out with a pill than you are for them to say, have you actually noticed you're a mouth breather, upper chest breather, fast breather, you know, or if you're having problems with certain pains and things, are they likely to go, have you thought about how you move while you're doing the washing, or, you know, just generally throughout the day? Or, you know, they're not going to necessarily alert you to this. And this is why this slightly more holistic approach is so important. And it's just being generally interested in how can I just make sure I am generally having positive habits throughout the day. And as soon as you know about one, you're a bit more curious about the other, in the same way that we're both into barefoot shoes now.
Yes, that was my fault. Yeah, no, absolutely. And because you're in pursuit of wellness, not in a showy offy or a way where you're sort of trying to be superhuman. You just want to live life in a healthy way where you feel good and you can enjoy living. And, you know, we all deserve that, don't we? I mean, why would we not want to look into that and invest in that, I think?
Exactly. And as far as I see it, if you're going to live to 80 and you're going to be kept alive by drugs or whatever else, you might as... Okay, well, I'm going to say 80 for the majority of people. Okay. If you're going to live to at least 80 and you're going to be kept alive by drugs or surgeries that are great, you know, when you need them, I would like to be able to think that we could at least move and breathe well enough to enjoy the days that are left, rather than be sort of unable to do that as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So to wrap up, thank you so much for joining me for the final episode in this series. It's really lovely to have a friend on, and you know, I'm equally passionate about what you do, and I know you are of me, and I'm always hugely grateful for your support. We really push each other on, and that's a rare thing. So it was wonderful to have you on here, and I do hope you'll come back again in the future. But just before we finish, I'd love for you to give one little practical tip. And you know I'm passionate about walking. When we get together, we always go for a walk and a play in the woods or whatever, because we know how important that is. So can you just tell people a little bit about how they can think about their breathing as they're walking?
So one of my favorite ways to improve the walking is to actually pace the breathing out. A lot of people think that because we're moving, we need to be breathing faster, harder, heavier in order to sort of get more air, is their impression. And yet what I want to be challenging is, well, actually we want to be delivering that oxygen from the buses into the cells. So can we slow down the exhale of air rather than increase the inhale of air? And in this scenario, what we can do is we can start to pace. And a really easy method that can be very helpful on staircases or for those who feel a bit breathless, assuming, of course, that you are able to last more than 3 seconds because you are going into the correct area of the lungs. And this is what really helps people to go, oh, I can't do it. Maybe I should look into it. Mm. So you pace yourself, for example, 5 steps on an in-breath and 5 steps on an out-breath. And if that's too much, you could try 4, or you might go as long as 6, but about 5 is perfect. So just breathing in 2, 3, 4, 5, out, 2, 3, 4, 5. And just try that sort of pacing. Some people will manipulate it a little bit, but it's a perfect starting point. And if you can control the flow of your breath and actually sometimes just let go, especially on a cold day where you sort of feel this need to go, and everything's getting so cold and you're feeling a bit agitated, and instead just go, let go. I don't need as much air as I think I need. I'm just going to soften and allow it to flow in gently and seep out again. And actually, once we let go, we realize it's actually okay. But that can be very hard for some people initially. So it's something to try, see how you get on. And as you said, my TEDx or my book both have the 3 spots of breathing that help us actually assess a little bit, but also try what we should be doing. And the free masterclass allows them to actually go, okay, I want to see what I could do here and how can I improve it. So if this is challenging, definitely check that out.
Thank you so much. That's brilliant. It was really lovely talking to you, as ever.
You too.
And yeah, do come back again in the future.
I will. If I can be allowed back, I will definitely come back. Thank you so much.
I hope you've enjoyed listening, and if you have, you can help by doing 3 things. First, press the follow button to tell podcast platforms you want to listen again. Second, please give the show a 5-star rating and leave a review about why you liked it. And third, I'd love you to share it with friends and family or on your socials, for which I'm truly thankful. Finally, if this podcast is making you want to start reclaiming your own movement, join me in the Reclaim Movement membership for classes, both live and by replay, and countless videos of mini movement breaks to add into your daily life, covering practical and fun, important natural movements. Visit reclaimmovement.co.uk/membership to get started with your 7-day free trial. See you for the next episode, and thank you so much for listening.